Pack your things. You're not staying here. My mother said it while I stood in the kitchen with one hand on my stomach. She didn't pull me aside. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't wait until my father came home from work, or until my younger brother finished eating, or until the neighbor stopped standing at her sink across the yard, where windows lined up just closely enough for people to pretend they weren't watching each other. She said it in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday evening, with the potatoes still steaming on the table and the dish towel over her shoulder like she was discussing trash day. Then my father looked up from his plate and said, "You made your choice. Now deal with it." He opened his wallet, took out a 20 and a 10, and held them toward me like he was settling a minor inconvenience. I remember the bills more clearly than his face. One was folded down the middle, one had a dark crease near the corner. His thumb held them. Flat. $30. That was what my place in the family cost once I became a problem. They could no longer explain away. I didn't take the money right away. Not because I was brave. Because I thought if I stood there long enough, if I kept one hand on the edge of the counter and one hand over the place where my body had already started changing, maybe someone else in the room would speak first. My brother kept looking at his plate. My aunt, who had dropped off a casserole dish and stayed too long, stared at the refrigerator door where my mother kept church bulletins under magnets shaped like fruit. No one said anything, not even my own family. That was the part that taught me what the next 18 years would really be about. Not survival. Isolation. My mother set the dish towel down. "Take it or don't, but you're leaving tonight." I finally took the money because refusing it would have made me look dramatic, and my family had always been best at turning my pain into a character flaw. The bills felt damp from my father's hand. I put them in the pocket of my coat. Then I went to my room and packed 2 changes of clothes, my prenatal vitamins, a hairbrush, a framed photo of my grandmother, and the small denim bag I'd been using as a purse, because by then I was already trying not to spend money on anything I couldn't justify. I did not pack much because some part of me still thought I'd be back by morning. That is how denial works when it arrives inside the walls you grew up in. Your body understands what's happening before your mind can afford to. When I came back down with the bag over my shoulder, my mother was standing by the front door. Not crying, not angry, just finished. My father did not stand up. He said, "You know where the line was." That was another family habit, turning their own cruelty into my boundary violation. I looked at him and asked, "So that's it?" My mother answered before he did. "You made your choice. That line would follow me for years. They used it to throw me out, then to justify never calling, then to explain my absence to people who wanted the cleaner version. I walked the door. No one stopped me. My mother opened it, waited for me to step through, and closed it the second I did. Then she locked it. I heard the lock. That detail matters because memory chooses strange places to live. I don't remember what shoes I was wearing. I don't remember whether the porch light was on. I don't remember if my brother ever came to the window, but I remember the lock. The sound was small, metal turning, one click, then silence. I stood on the porch with $30 in my pocket and nowhere I could go without explaining too much to people I didn't trust with the whole truth. I was pregnant, alone. And that night, I slept on a bus bench. Not because there were no shelters in the city. There were. I learned about them later. That night, I still thought I was only displaced, not abandoned. There is a difference, and it takes a few hours in cold air to understand which one you are. The bus bench was 3 streets over, near a pharmacy and a laundromat that stayed lit all night. I chose it because there was light, because people sometimes came and went, because it felt less dangerous than a park and less humiliating than knocking on a stranger's door with one bag and a hand over my stomach. The bench smelled like rainwater and cigarettes. Every time headlights turned the corner, I sat up straighter. Every time footsteps got too close, I pretended I was waiting for someone. No one came. No one called. That night should have ended everything. It didn't. 18 years later, my son said one sentence in front of everyone that made my parents go completely silent. If you've ever been abandoned, when you needed help the most, You'll understand this. I learned very quickly that no one was coming to save me. That sounds dramatic when people say it now, but it wasn't dramatic then. It was procedural. It was about hours and numbers and what could be stretched another day. $3.75 for coffee and a stale muffin the next morning because I needed somewhere warm to sit. $12 for a room. In a boarding house for one night because the woman at the desk took cash and did not ask questions. $7 and some change for a bus pass after I counted the bills twice and realized walking everywhere would stop being an option before my pride did. By the end of the second day, my $30 had become a lesson in how little room there is between humiliation and logistics. I was 10 weeks pregnant. That was another fact I kept saying to myself in numbers because numbers were steadier than feelings. 10 weeks, $30, one denim bag, 0 calls from home. The first place I went after that bus bench was the office where I worked part-time doing data entry for a dental insurance company. The receptionist took one look at my face and asked if I was sick. I said no. She asked if I needed to go home. I almost laughed. There was no home to go to. I worked that day with a vending machine granola bar in. My stomach and the knowledge that if I cried in the bathroom, I would have to do it quietly because mascara was harder to replace than dignity. By lunchtime, I had called my mother twice. No answer. I called the house phone once. My father picked up. He didn't say hello. He just said, "Don't do this." Then he hung up. That was when the situation changed shape in my head. Until then, I had still been telling myself this was temporary. A lesson. A punishment with an end date. The kind of family cruelty that becomes survivable because everyone agrees not to name it too clearly once tempers cool. The phone call taught me otherwise. They had already moved me into the category of person they no longer had. To hear, "Have you ever gone from daughter to inconvenience in less than 24 hours?" I spent the next week moving between cheap rooms, office bathrooms, and one old friend's couch that was offered with more pity than privacy. I never stayed anywhere long enough to feel safe asking for more. People are generous with one night. Less generous when your need starts developing a timeline. My pregnancy made everything more visible and less speakable at the same time. Women looked at my stomach before they looked at my face, even though I wasn't really showing yet. Some could tell. Older women usually can. They know the shape of someone protecting the front of their body with one hand all the time. I learned how to sit so people wouldn't ask questions. How to answer, "How are you?" with fine in a tone that ended conversation instead of inviting concern. How to count quarters in a laundromat while pretending I wasn't calculating whether clean clothes or real dinner mattered more that day. My mother's line stayed with me. "You made your choice." At first it sounded like a punishment. Then, as the first months passed, it became something else. The phrase my family used whenever they wanted to turn my suffering into evidence that they were right. That was the second cruelty. The first was throwing me out. The second was narrating my survival as proof that I deserved it. I heard it through other people before I heard it from them again directly. A church woman I barely knew stopped me outside a grocery store and said, "Your mother's praying you come to your senses." A cousin left a voicemail that began with, "I know tensions are high, but maybe if you stopped being so stubborn." An aunt sent a card with no return address that said, in handwriting I knew immediately, "Parents make hard choices out of love." Love. That word made me physically ill for months. I found a room after 3 weeks. One room, above a hair salon, with a hot plate, a stained ceiling, and one small window that looked onto the alley behind the building. It was all I could afford because the owner agreed to weekly cash, and because I said I had a cousin nearby who checked on me. That was a lie. But it was the kind of lie women tell to stay alive in places where men own keys to your door. The first thing I bought for that room was not food. It was a second lock. The second thing was a blue blanket from a discount store because the room got cold after dark, and pregnancy turns your body into a place where discomfort gets louder. The third thing was a small notebook. That notebook became the object that carried me through the next year. Bus fare, hours worked, doctor appointment dates, what the nurse said, what I owed, how many diapers the women at the church pantry gave me without asking too many questions. Which lies I told? At work so I could keep my shifts long enough to matter. I wrote everything down because writing it made it harder for my parents' version to swallow mine whole. She ruined her life. She chose this. She always was too emotional. She thought love was enough. That is what they told people. What I wrote instead was, worked 9 hours, feet swollen, baby moved today, needed milk, cried in bathroom, still here. They said it like it was the end of my story. It wasn't even the beginning. The labor was the midpoint shock of my own life, though I didn't know to call it that then. I went into labor alone. That sentence is still hard to write because people hear it and immediately rush to the obvious sadness of it, but the deeper part is harder to explain. It wasn't just that no one came with me. It was that by then I had so completely stopped expecting anyone that when the pain started, I made tea before I called a cab. That is what abandonment does. It removes the part of you that still assumes help will answer, if summoned. My son was born in a county hospital under fluorescent lights that made everyone look pale and practical. A nurse named Angela held my hand through the last stretch because she saw the emergency contact line blank on my intake form and decided, wordlessly, to become a human bridge over the place where family should have been. When they put him on my chest, he opened one eye first, then the other, and made a face like the world had already disappointed him, but not enough to make him leave. I laughed. That surprised me too, because for the first time since the lock clicked behind me, something in the room felt bigger than shame. I named him Micah, not because my parents would have hated it, though they probably would have, because it sounded strong without needing to be hard. I brought him home to the one room over the salon with the blue blanket and the second lock and the notebook full of numbers that had become my life. I didn't give him everything. I gave him truth. I gave him breakfast before excuses, consistency before appearances, and a mother who might have been tired and scared and often one bill away from panic, but who never once made him feel like love was conditional on how he made me look. What would you do if you had nowhere to go and no one to help you? Children grow inside the reality you give them. That used to frighten me, not because I thought I'd fail him, because I knew exactly what it felt like to be shaped by someone else's shame. So I built our life around plain things. Dinner at the table, even when the table was small and one leg had to be propped with folded cardboard. Homework before television. Real answers, when he was old enough to ask real questions. No lies to make me look better. No rewritten versions of the past because I was uncomfortable with how I survived it. Micah knew we didn't have grandparents in our daily life. He knew there were relatives somewhere who did not call. He knew there had been a break before he was born. What he did not know, for a long time, was exactly how deliberate it had been. I told myself I was protecting him. That was only partly true. I was also protecting the last small part of me that still hated hearing the story in full. By the time he was 8, he had already become the kind of child who noticed what adults hoped would blur. He noticed that birthday parties for classmates usually came with grandparents carrying wrapped gifts and cameras. He noticed that on school forms, the family emergency line still held only my name and the backup was Mrs. Keller from 2 streets over, who had become our practical aunt through years of casseroles, pickups, and the sort of reliable kindness that asks no theological questions. He noticed, too, that I got very still whenever anyone mentioned family values like a simple phrase. He did not press then. He was kind enough to wait until he understood there was pain under the missing pieces. Years later, when he was 14 and taller than me and had Daniel's stillness in rooms that wanted noise, he asked while drying dishes, "Did they leave you, or did you leave them?" Children deserve truth in the size they can carry. I put the plate down and said, "They sent me away." He didn't speak for a second. Then he asked, "When?" I answered, "When I was pregnant with you." That was the first time I said it aloud to him in the kitchen, under ordinary light, without family mythology softening the edges. He looked down at the dish towel in his hands and asked the question I had spent 14 years avoiding and expecting all at once. Did anybody help you? I said, Not from them. He nodded slowly. Then he dried the same plate twice and said nothing else. But something shifted after that. Not in him, exactly. In the room. Truth had entered in full size and stayed. If you had a child depending on you, how far would you go to make sure he never felt what you felt? By the time Micah turned 18, Daniel and I had built something solid enough that my old notebook felt like an artifact from another species of woman. Not because we were rich. We weren't. But there is a dignity in a stable mortgage payment, and a kitchen with cabinets you chose yourself, and a son whose future is not measured by whether your family approves of it. Daniel had done what my parents said. Men like him never do. He built, not just buildings, a life. He started his own company, after years of taking the jobs no one else wanted, the overnight repairs, the emergency call-outs, the complex structural fixes that made wealthy people and hospitals and apartment managers suddenly discover deep respect for trades they never thought about when things worked. He hired carefully, paid fairly, learned where to say no. People called him because he showed up and fixed what other men talked around. Micah inherited his steadiness, but not his silence. That combination mattered. A quiet father teaches a boy where weight goes. A truthful mother teaches him which things should never be carried by the wrong people. He knew enough by then to understand the outline of what my parents had done. He also knew, because teenagers are sharper than adults want them to be, that my pain still changed temperature when certain subjects touched it. The reconnect came, as most family reentries do, disguised as occasion. My parents were hosting a big anniversary dinner. 40 years. Church people, relatives, old friends, my sister, still nearby, still orbiting them in the dutiful way that had once made her look safer than she actually was. My brother, divorced now and back in town after years away, playing the part of recovered son with too much gratitude and not enough memory. A long dining room table, photographs, toasts. My mother sent the invitation through my sister. Of course she did. The envelope was cream and embossed and carried no apology. Just date, time, location, and the line, "We hope you'll join us." Hope. That word irritated me more than anger would have. Not because it was false, because it presumed too much. I almost threw it away. Micah found it on the counter. "Are we going?" he asked. The "we" in that sentence mattered. It reminded me that this was no longer only about the girl on the bus bench with $30 in her coat pocket. My life had witnesses now who belonged to me. I said, "I don't know." He looked at the envelope, then at me. Do they think none of it matters anymore? Teenagers rarely ask soft questions if the truth in the room feels solid enough, I said. I think they want the version where enough time passed. He nodded. That was all. But he had started listening in a new way. They didn't know what he had been listening to his whole life. Not speeches. Not bitterness. Patterns. The way I got quiet when someone said, "Parents do their best." The way Daniel's jaw tightened whenever my father's name came up. The old notebook in the back of my dresser drawer with years of survival written in tight blue ink. The $30 story, told once. Then never theatricalized because I refused to turn my own pain into identity theater for a child who deserved a mother, not a martyr. Micah knew enough to understand two things clearly by 18. 1. I had survived without them. 2. They had never really paid for what they did. That was why I agreed to the dinner. Not for closure, not for reconciliation, not because I thought time had softened anyone into decency, because part of me was tired of being the only person in the room who remembered accurately. Would you have gone back after that, or stayed away forever? What if the child they helped abandon became the one who finally spoke the truth? The night of the anniversary dinner, my mother's house looked exactly the way she had always wanted her life to look. Warm lights in every front window, perfect landscaping, the long dining table extended and covered in linen, framed photos, arranged along the entry console to suggest continuity, devotion, and family blessing if viewed in the correct order and from the correct angle. I stood in the foyer for 1 second too long, and that was enough for old memory to press against my ribs. This was the same house, different rug, different chandelier, same walls. The house I had left with a denim bag and $30 in my pocket. The house whose lock I still heard some nights if I woke too fast. The house that had gone on hosting Christmas dinners and prayer circles and Easter brunches without me, while I learned how to buy diapers in exact quantities and pretend to coworkers that my son's father was around before Daniel and I married because shame was easier to edit publicly than explain. Micah stood beside me in a dark jacket Daniel bought him for graduation. He was taller than my father now, broader in the shoulders, still young enough for strangers to see the boy before the man. Old enough, though, that no one in that house could dismiss him as an accessory to my story. My mother saw him first, not me, him. Her face changed with the quick discipline of a woman who has spent decades practicing hospitality over discomfort. She smiled. Too fast, too bright. There you are, she said. There you are, as if we had only been delayed. My father came out from the dining room and stopped in the hallway just long enough for me to see that he had not prepared for Micah as a grown person. He had prepared for a child. A vague concept, the collateral result of my bad decision. Not a man with eyes that looked directly back at him. My sister appeared behind them, carrying a platter of rolls, and nearly dropped it when she saw us all standing there in that line of old damage and new witness. My mother recovered first. She moved toward Micah with both hands out in that overperformed grandmother way she never once earned and said, "Look at you!" Micah stepped half an inch closer to me. Not enough to be rude, enough to be clear. That was the first tension line. She noticed. So did I. The room beyond us was already full. Enough that conversations had gone soft at the edges. People knew someone important had arrived. Not beloved. Important. That is another kind of silence, and it is often more dangerous. Dinner was arranged like theater, my parents at the center, anniversary cake on the sideboard, framed wedding photo near the fireplace, my brother and his second wife to my father's right, my sister and her husband to my mother's left, church friends, cousins, old neighbors, everyone in the positions that told the cleanest possible story about a family that had remained intact through time and trial. Our places were near the end. Of course they were. Not hidden. Presented. Close. Enough to be seen. Far enough to be managed. My mother gave a toast about endurance. My father gave one about blessing. Someone from church talked about the witness of a marriage that survives. I almost choked on my wine. Micah stayed quiet through most of it. That made the room underestimate him. A mistake adults make often. They assume quiet means unformed. The trouble began with the photo slideshow. My mother had put together one of those anniversary montages set to instrumental music. Wedding photos, baby photos, school recitals, church picnics, my sister in ribbons, my brother in baseball uniforms, my parents in matching holiday sweaters from the 90s, laughing in front of a fireplace where all the logs probably looked arranged. Then the pictures advanced to Our Family Now. That was the title card. Our Family Now. A photo of my sister's family. A photo of my brother's. A photo of my parents with the pastor and his wife. A photo of everyone from last Christmas. Everyone. Not us. Not me. Not Daniel. Not Micah. My mother had invited us into the room and then publicly edited us back out of the visual record. That was when I understood exactly what kind of evening this was. Not reunion. Absorption without acknowledgement. Presence without restoration. The old family skill. Using my silence to make exclusion look natural, Micah looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. He didn't say anything yet, but his jaw changed. If you've ever sat in a room where someone tried to rewrite your place while you were still breathing in it, you know how quickly the air can thin. After the slideshow, my father stood to thank everyone for coming. Then, as if we had somehow arrived at the emotional climax everyone had been moving toward all night, he looked down the table at us and said, "It's good to have everyone together again." Everyone. That word landed like a lie too large for the room. No one spoke. Because what could anyone say? There we were, physically present and historically removed, while my parents tried to fold us into the evening like a garnish added after the dish was already plated. My mother added, "Time has a way of healing things." That almost did it. Not because it was cruel. Because it was lazy. Time had not healed anything. Silence had simply protected them from consequence. Micah put down his fork. The sound was small, but every head near us turned. He looked at my father. First, then my mother, then at the anniversary cake, then finally at the slideshow remote beside my mother's plate. And in the kind of clear voice that belongs only to young men who have not yet learned to fear family hierarchy the way older people do, he asked, "Is that why you threw her out pregnant with $30? The room went completely still. That was the sentence. One sentence. No speech, no rehearsed revenge, no dramatic accusation layered with years of pain. Just the truth in its most embarrassing shape. My mother's hand stopped over her wineglass. My father's face changed too late. My sister went white. Micah didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just kept looking at them and added, quieter, because if time healed it, why does she still know the exact amount? No one moved. No one breathed loudly enough to admit it. Would you have stayed quiet after that? Or let the room sit in what it had finally heard from the one person they never planned for? The silence after my son's sentence was unlike any silence my parents had ever controlled. That was the difference. I had heard plenty of family silences before, punishing silences, corrective silences. The kind that tell you someone older and more powerful is waiting for you to shrink first. This one belonged to the room, not to them. My mother tried to recover. She always did. It wasn't like, "That," she said. But her voice came out too fast, too thin. The controlled warmth she used in church and committee meetings had vanished. In its place was something rawer and far less effective: exposure. Micah looked at her and said, "Then what was it like?" There are moments when a child becomes a man not because he turns 18, not because he graduates, not because he leaves home, but because he refuses to accept a lie simply because it's spoken by an older relative in a nice dining room. This was one of those moments. My father tried authority next. "This isn't the time." Micah did not flinch. "Seems like it is," he said. I didn't stop him. That matters too. Not because I wanted him to fight for me. Because he already knew the truth and was old enough to decide what silence would cost him. My brother's wife looked at me with something close to horror. Not horror at me, but horror at suddenly understanding that an old family story had a body count she had never been told about. One of my mother's church friends stared so hard at her folded napkin I thought she might tear it. My sister's husband, who had spent years mastering the art of staying neutral in the wrong rooms, finally looked at my father and said, "Is that true?" My parents had spent 18 years making sure no one asked the question that plainly. That was the collapse. Not shouting, not crying, plain language. "Is that true?" My mother answered first because she could never let my father be the first one to fail publicly. "She was in trouble," she said. The room remained still. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the sentence was so small compared to what it was trying to cover: trouble. As if pregnancy were weather, as if abandonment were discipline, as if a locked door and $30 in a girl's hand could be reduced to parental concern with one vague noun. Micah turned to me. "Is that what happened?" That question mattered more than anything else said that night because it came to me cleanly. Not as accusation, not as rhetorical setup. Just a son asking his mother, in front of the people who had once made her suffer, to name the truth at the same size as the lie. So I did. "She told me to pack my things," I said. "Your grandfather gave me $30. Then they locked the door behind me. My father looked down. That told the room more than defense would have, because men like him only lower their eyes when facts have become too exact to argue without looking. "Absurd," my mother said. "You're making it sound—" "I remember the bills," I said. That cut her off. The room got even quieter. Truth becomes hardest to resist when it contains detail no one would invent for. Style. $30, a folded 20, a crease in the 10, the lock, the bus bench, the blue blanket. People know when they are hearing memory instead of performance. My son looked back at them. Then he said the line that ended whatever was left of the evening. You told her to deal with it. She did. Without you. There it was. The memory hook returned in a new shape. You made your choice. They had said it to me as exile. He handed it back to them as verdict. My mother began to cry then. I should tell the truth about how that felt. It did not satisfy me, not because I am especially noble, because by the time someone like my mother cries publicly, the damage has already been done in the only places that mattered. Her tears were not repair. They were an instinct to pull the room back toward her pain before mine got too clear. And for the first time in my life, the room did not go with her. That was the real reversal. My aunt, my mother's own sister, looked at her and said, softly but clearly, "You left her outside?" No one had asked it like that before. Not even me. Because language matters. Throwing someone out sounds cinematic, survivable, almost mutual if said badly enough. Left her outside. That was the bodily truth of it. My mother covered her mouth. My father said, "We thought she'd go to friends." Thought. Another small word trying to hold up a large sin. I looked at him and said, "You didn't ask." He had no answer. The room held that too. Not because everyone suddenly became brave. Because there are moments when courage becomes easier simply because the lie has become embarrassing to stand near, my sister finally cried. That surprised me more than my mother's tears did. Not because she loved me. Correctly, she hadn't. But because for 1 second I could see her understanding the cost of all the years she let my parents narrate me as difficult, distant, self-chosen. She had built her safety on their version, too. Now she was looking at the mortgage. My son sat back in his chair then, calm, finished. He did not rant, did not gloat, did not keep pushing. One sentence had opened the room. The second had closed it. That was enough. The anniversary cake stayed untouched for another 10 minutes while nobody knew what ritual could follow honesty that cleanly. My father tried once to restart the evening by thanking everyone for coming, but even he heard how foolish he sounded halfway through and stopped. I looked around the table, at the people who had once accepted my absence as weather, at the people who had listened to my parents for years because it was easier than imagining a girl alone on a bus bench with $30 and nowhere to go. At the son I had raised in one room over a hair salon, then in a duplex with a leaking bathroom ceiling. Then, in the small house, Daniel rebuilt one paycheck and one repair job at a time until it became ours in the only sense that matters: safety, honesty, repetition. And I understood, suddenly and fully, that there was nothing left for me to win. The room had heard it. The lie had broken. My son had spoken. The debt did not vanish, but it stopped accruing interest in silence. If this hit close to home, tell me where you're listening from. I stood first, not dramatically. I put my napkin on the table, touched Micah's shoulder once, and said, "We're leaving." No one tried to stop us. That mattered too, because families like mine only chase you to the door when they still believe they can manage the exit. This one had gotten away from them. In the foyer, my mother called my name. I turned. That was my mistake, maybe. Or maybe I needed to see her once more in the house that had once expelled me. She said, "I did what I thought I had to do." I looked at her and realized, with a calm so complete it almost felt like exhaustion, that this was the most honest thing she had said in years. Not because it excused anything, because it admitted the real structure. She had not acted in love. She had acted in allegiance to her own fear, image, and control. And she still thought necessity made it forgivable. "It cost you me," I said. Then I left. Outside, the night air felt ordinary. That was the strangest part. No thunder, no dramatic rain, no cinematic vindication, just a quiet street, parked cars, porch lights, and my son walking beside me with the kind of careful pace people use when they know someone next to them is carrying something old and heavy but no longer invisible. When we got into the car, he looked at me and said, "I'm sorry I said it like that." I almost smiled. That was exactly how it needed to be said. He nodded. Then, after a minute, he asked, "Did you really sleep on a bus bench?" I looked out through the windshield at my parents' house. "Yeah," I said. "I really did." He looked down at his hands. Then he said, very quietly, I'm glad you didn't let that be the end. There it was. Not revenge, not humiliation, not even justice in the theatrical sense. Witness from the life I built after they were done with me. That was more than enough. I did not go back after that night. Not for Christmas. Not when my mother mailed a card with no apology and a check I tore in half before the kettle finished boiling. Not when my sister texted 6 months later asking if we could find a way forward. Not when my father left one voicemail saying, families should try to mend things before it's too late, as if time itself had caused the distance and not his own hand offering me $30 at a kitchen table while my mother stood by the locked door. Some doors don't need to be closed loudly, just never opened again. I kept the notebook. I still have it in the top drawer of my dresser under winter scarves and an old church bulletin from another life. The pages are crowded and practical, and sometimes hard to read because exhaustion made my handwriting smaller then. Bus fare, rent, milk, doctor visit, formula, shoes, childcare. Keep going. Every once in a while, on mornings when memory gets too polished and tries to blur the damage into something survivable enough to forgive, I open it and look at the first page I wrote after being thrown out. $30. No room tonight. Still here. That line is the real ending. Not because it is triumphant, because it is true, they said. I made my choice. In the end, I was the only one who lived with it honestly.